She grew up in the kind of place where dreams went to die, a dusty, forgotten town nestled in the folds of the Appalachian Mountains. Her name was Elara, and she was a wisp of a thing, all sharp angles and watchful eyes, with a mop of unruly hair the color of dark earth. The world for Elara was a small, hard place. Her father was a ghost who had disappeared into the maw of the coal mine years ago, and her mother worked double shifts at the diner, leaving Elara to raise herself in a rusted, single-wide trailer that leaned precariously into the hillside. Solitude was her only constant companion. While other kids her age were navigating the treacherous currents of high school popularity, Elara was navigating the woods. She knew every deer path, every hidden spring, every hollow log that served as a home for a family of foxes. And her greatest solace was an old, beat-up .22 rifle her father had left behind, a relic with a chipped stock and a rusty bolt. She'd sneak it out of its hiding place under the trailer and spend hours in the deep woods, not to kill, but to test herself. She'd challenge herself to hit a specific knot on a pine tree from 100 yards, or to knock a pine cone from a branch without shattering it. It wasn't about the noise or the power. It was about the quiet concentration, the feeling of her breath becoming one with the wind, the world shrinking down to the tiny space between her eye and a distant target. One sweltering summer afternoon, she was deep in a holler, practicing her shooting, when a voice, as dry and rough as autumn leaves, startled her. "You're flinching." Elara spun around, the rifle half raised. An old man sat on a fallen log, and seemingly materialized from the very shadows of the forest. He was gaunt, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, and he wore faded military fatigues that hung loosely on his frame. His eyes, however, were the clearest, most startling blue she had ever seen, like chips of ice, and they were fixed on her with an unnerving intensity. "I ain't flinching," she retorted, her voice small but defiant. The man, whose name she would later learn was Ezra, simply shook his head. "You are. Right before the trigger breaks. You're anticipating the kick. For a target that ain't moving, it don't matter much. But it will." He didn't wait for an invitation. He just stood up, ambled over, and gently took the rifle from her hands. He worked the bolt, checked the safety, and held it up to his own shoulder, his movements fluid and economical. This old girl has heart, but she's starved for love." He then spent the next hour not shooting, but teaching. He showed her how to properly seat the rifle in the pocket of her shoulder, how to adjust her cheek weld on the stock, and most importantly, how to breathe. Inhale, exhale, and squeeze on the natural pause at the bottom. Let the shot surprise you. That was the beginning. Ezra, it turned out, lived in a ramshackle cabin a few miles deeper into the woods, a place so hidden you'd walk right past it if you didn't know it was there. He was a hermit, a ghost the town had long since forgotten. Over the following weeks and months, he became Elara's secret tutor. He never spoke of his past, and Elara, instinctively understanding that some doors are best left unopened, never asked. But his lessons were unlike anything she could have imagined. He didn't just teach her to shoot. He taught her to see. He taught her about windage, how to read the sway of the treetops and the ripples on a puddle to judge the wind's speed and direction. He taught her about mirage, the heat waves that shimmered off the ground and distorted a distant target. He taught her about ballistics, how a bullet's path was a graceful arc, not a straight line. He taught her patience. They would lie on their bellies for hours, observing a distant clearing, watching the deer, the birds, the way the light shifted, until she understood that to be a sniper was to be a student of the world, to absorb every minute detail. He also taught her about concealment. He showed her how to use natural materials, mud, leaves, broken branches, to break up her outline until she became part of the landscape. "You don't hide," he would say in his low, gravelly voice. "You become invisible. You are not a person in the woods. You are a shadow, a rock, a patch of dead leaves. The forest accepts you. She learned to move without sound, to control her heartbeat, to slow her breathing to an almost imperceptible rhythm. The old .22 was eventually replaced with a heavy, beautifully crafted .308 rifle he produced from a hidden locker under his floorboards. It felt like a sacred object in her hands. Years passed in this secret rhythm. Ilara grew from a scrawny girl into a tall, quiet young woman. She was still an outsider at school, but she no longer cared. She had a world that was all her own, a world of focus and discipline, guided by the enigmatic man in the woods. And she graduated high school with no plans for college, her path unclear, until Ezra, now frailer and slower, sat her down one evening as the sun bled orange and red through his cabin window. "You have a gift, Ilara," he said, his ice-chip eyes softer now. "It's not just about pulling a trigger, it's about control. It's about seeing what others can't. The world needs people like you, but you can't stay here. This place will shrink you until you disappear for real." He handed her a worn leather address book, open to a single handwritten name and a number in Fayetteville, North Carolina. "Go see a man named Sergeant First Class Morrison. Tell him Ezra sent you." She looked at the name, then back at the old man who had given her a purpose. "What am I supposed to tell him?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips, the first she'd ever seen. "I tell him you're ready to learn the rest." The address led her to a nondescript gate at Fort Bragg, the home of the U.S. Army Special Operations Command. Sergeant First Class Morrison was a bull of a man with a shaved head and a glare that could strip paint. When she mentioned Ezra's name, his entire demeanor shifted. He stared at her for a long, hard minute, then simply said, "Wait here." An hour later, she was being put through a series of physical and mental tests that seemed designed to break her. They ran her until her lungs burned, tested her problem-solving under pressure, and evaluated her marksmanship on a state-of-the-art range. She was raw, but the fundamentals Ezra had drilled into her, the breath control, the wind reading, the preternatural patience, shone through. A few weeks later, she was on a bus to basic training, and then to the grueling selection process for an even more elite world. Years of silence and solitude had been her preparation. While other candidates buckled under the sleep deprivation and constant harassment, Ilara seemed to draw strength from it. She could move through the woods as if she were made of mist. On the sniper course, she was a prodigy. Her instructors, hardened veterans of countless deployments, were baffled by her instincts. She could judge distances with unnerving accuracy, rid the wind like a seasoned sailor, and, most importantly, she possessed the one quality that could not be taught, the ability to wait, utterly still and focused, for as long as it took. They praised her natural talent, never knowing it was the result of a decade of secret tutelage from a master. Eventually, she was assigned to a Tier 1 Special Operations Unit, an invisible warrior in an invisible war. She served multiple tours in some of the most dangerous places on Earth, places whose names the public would never know. Her spotter, a bear of a man named Marcus, initially doubted the quiet, pale woman who seemed more comfortable with a tree than a person. But after watching her make an impossible shot from 1,000 yards out, through swirling dust and a shifting wind, a shot that saved the lives of their entire team, he became her fiercest advocate and protector. To the men in her unit, she was a legend in the making, a ghost who delivered death with cold, mathematical precision. They called her Whisper. But while she saved countless lives from the shadows, the one life she couldn't save was Ezra's. While he had passed away peacefully in his sleep a few years after she left, the news delivered to her by Morrison in a brief, clinical letter. She had never gotten to say goodbye, never gotten to thank him properly. The grief was a cold, hard knot in her chest that she carried with her on every mission. She thought of his lessons not just as marksmanship, but as a philosophy for life itself. Be patient, be observant, be invisible. And when you act, let it be with decisive, quiet purpose. The incident that would tear the veil from her past happened on a clear, cold Tuesday afternoon back home in the States. She was on leave, visiting her mother, who still lived in the same rusted trailer. For the first time in years, Ilara allowed herself to wander the old, familiar woods. She found herself at Ezra's cabin, now a collapsed and rotting skeleton of its former self, slowly being reclaimed by the forest. She stood there for a long time, a solitary figure in a green field jacket, saying a silent goodbye. As she walked back toward the small town, she heard the sound. It was a panicked, high-pitched screaming, followed by the guttural roar of an animal. Without a second thought, she broke into a silent run, her years of training taking over. She crested a small ridge and looked down into the shallow creek bed below. Her heart stopped. A young girl, no more than 7 or 8, with the same unruly dark hair Ilara had once had, was frozen against the steep bank. 20 feet in front of her, a massive feral dog, a mix of pit bull and something else, all muscle and matted fur, was crouched, its lips pulled back in a horrific snarl, ready to spring. And the girl's screams had turned to terrified, choking sobs. Ilara had no weapon. Her sidearm was back at the trailer. The distance was about 75 yards. She was unarmed against a beast that could tear a child apart in seconds. Her mind, honed by years of combat, cycled through options with terrifying speed. Screaming might startle the dog, or it might trigger its attack. Running down there would take too long. Then, her eyes scanned the ground, a scattering of rocks, not just any rocks. They were the smooth, fist-sized stones from the creek bed. Ezra's voice, clear as a bell, echoed in her memory. A sniper uses the best tool for the job. Sometimes that tool isn't a rifle. It's the situation itself. Make the situation your weapon. She didn't think. She acted. In one fluid motion, she scooped up a stone, and her body flowing into a familiar posture. It wasn't a shooting stance, but it was close. She drew back her arm, not with the wild fling of a child, but with the coiled power and precise calculation of a pitcher on a mound. She factored in the distance, the slight angle, the weight of the stone. She exhaled, and on the pause at the bottom, she let it fly. The stone didn't just hit the dog. It struck it with surgical precision, right on the most sensitive part of its nose. The animal yelped in shock and pain, recoiling as if it had been struck by a bullet. Before it could recover its wits, Ilara was already in motion, scrambling down the ridge, grabbing another stone, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. "Get back! Get away from her!" The dog, disoriented and facing a new, more aggressive threat, hesitated for a crucial second. And that was all Ilara needed. She placed herself between the animal and the girl, her eyes blazing with a terrifying focus. She raised the second stone, her arm cocked back, her entire being projecting a promise of lethal force. The dog, sensing it was no longer the predator but the prey, turned tail and fled into the undergrowth. Ilara didn't chase it. She immediately knelt by the girl, her hands gentle as she checked her for injuries. "You're okay," she said softly, her voice a stark contrast to the fury of moments before. "You're safe now. It's gone." The girl's mother, who had been searching frantically nearby, came crashing through the trees, her face a mask of terror that melted into overwhelming relief as she saw her daughter alive. Sobbing, she scooped the child into her arms. The story of the rescue spread through the tiny town like wildfire. But it was the detail that stuck, that was repeated with awe and disbelief. A single, perfectly aimed stone from over 70 yards away had saved a little girl's life. People began to look at Ilara, the quiet woman who had left and returned with new eyes. The local sheriff, a man named Grady, who had known Ilara since she was a kid, came by the trailer to get a statement. After she told him what happened, he just shook his head. 75 yards with a rock, Alara? That's not luck. That's the kind of shot most men couldn't make with a rifle. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw for the first time the coiled stillness, the watchful eyes that missed nothing. Where in tarnation did you learn to do a thing like that? It was the question the whole town was asking, and it was in that moment, as Alara prepared to offer a vague answer, that an old man who had been sitting on the porch of the general store, a man who had fought in a war long ago, spoke up. He was a veteran, a man who recognized the look in another warrior's eyes. "That ain't no trick you learn at no regular range, Sheriff," the old man said, his voice trembling with age but firm with certainty. "That there is a discipline. That's the kind of precision they teach the snipers, the real ones." The townspeople, gathered at the store, looked from the old veteran to Alara, the pieces of a puzzle they never knew existed beginning to click into place. They remembered the strange, quiet girl who spent all her time in the woods. And they remembered the old hermit, Ezra, a man whose past was as shadowed as the forests he lived in. Whispers began to circulate. Someone's grandpa, who had served in Korea, suddenly remembered a story about a legendary Marine sniper named Ezra, a ghost who had been credited with over 80 confirmed kills, a man who disappeared after the war and was presumed dead. The connection was made. The hermit in the woods hadn't been just a crazy old man. He had been a ghost of a different kind of war. And the quiet girl he had taken under his wing, the girl who had just saved a child with a rock thrown from an impossible distance, was his legacy. They had no idea. They had watched her grow up, seen her as the poor, strange girl from the trailer park, never knowing that a legend was living right next door, quietly shaping another. Alara stood on the porch of the trailer, the weight of their stares a palpable thing. She didn't offer any grand explanation. She didn't confirm or deny the stories. She simply looked out towards the woods, towards the spot where a fallen-down cabin held the memories of her true education. A single, perfectly aimed shot, or in this case a stone, had revealed everything. It revealed the years of hidden training, the bond with a forgotten hero, and the incredible, quiet woman she had become. The town finally saw her, not as the poor, fatherless girl, but as the protector she had always been, forged in the fires of a secret, mountain-bound mentorship, a living testament to a man whose name they were only now learning to whisper with respect. And in her heart, Alara knew that the shot hadn't just saved a little girl. It had been the final, perfect tribute to the old man who had taught her everything, a single, silent note of thanks for giving her a purpose and a life far beyond the confines of the holler.